How painful it is when people call you ugly behind your back, especially when those words come from the person closest to you. But sometimes, words overheard by accident become the push toward a decision that turns everything upside down. What was in that envelope, and how did this woman's life change? Enjoy listening. Joanna stopped at the ATM on the corner of Garden Street and Station Avenue, took out her card, and by habit, without looking at the screen, entered the amount, $2,400. Another payment. Another step up the staircase she had been climbing for 4 years. The machine buzzed and spat out a receipt. Joanna folded it in half and slipped it into the pocket of her puffer jacket. At home, she would put it into the folder, with the other 319. 4 left. 4 payments until March. Until freedom. It was already dark outside, even though it was only 6 in the evening. January in their city always felt longer than it should have on the calendar. Darkness came early, daylight came late, and the whole day passed as if in constant twilight. Joanna adjusted the bag on her shoulder, heavy, stuffed with office folders and groceries, and headed home. The snow crunched under her feet, the air was dry and freezing, cutting into her lungs. About 200 meters to the entrance. She walked slowly because she was tired. First, a full day at the trading company where she handled accounting. Then, without leaving her computer, another 3 hours of freelance work for an online store. Invoices, reports, reconciliations. Her eyes ached, her back throbbed. But her accountant's salary and the freelance work together gave her those same $2,400 every month that went straight to the mortgage, with just enough left to live on. Not much, but enough. The apartment on the 5th floor greeted her with warmth and the smell of something fried. Christopher was home. He was sitting at his computer in the room, wearing headphones, the screen glowing bluish. He didn't turn around when she came in. Joanna kicked off her boots, hung up her jacket, went into the kitchen, and put her bag on the table. The fridge hummed as usual, a frying pan stood on the stove. Christopher must have fried himself some eggs. A plate with leftovers lay in the sink. "Hi," Joanna said into the emptiness, knowing he wouldn't hear her. She took the groceries out of the bag: chicken, pasta, tomatoes, and started putting everything away. Her hands moved automatically. Chicken into the fridge, pasta into the cupboard, tomatoes to be washed. Then she pulled out a work folder, placed it on the table, took the receipt from her pocket, and carefully slipped it inside. With the others. The folder was thick, green, with an elastic band. It held all the payment documents from the past 4 years. Every receipt, every bank statement, every confirmation. Joanna kept records meticulously, out of professional habit. $133,000. All hers. Every dollar from her salary and her freelance work. By March, it would be $142,560. The full price of a 3-bedroom apartment in the city center. She closed the folder and put it back on the shelf above the table, where it always stood, between a cookbook and a box of tea. Then she turned on the kettle and leaned against the counter, looking out the window. Lights were glowing in the neighboring buildings. Somewhere below, a car passed by, honking. Joanna thought that soon, very soon, the apartment would be fully paid off, and life would feel lighter. No more counting every month, wondering if the money would be enough. No more taking extra freelance jobs. No more saving on clothes and vacations. They could just live, the two of them, with Christopher. Maybe then they would have a child. They hadn't talked about it for the past year, but sometimes Joanna thought that once the mortgage was gone, then it would be time. The kettle boiled. She poured water into a mug, dropped in a tea bag, and then something crashed in the other room. Christopher must have dropped something. Joanna took her mug and went to him. He was still sitting there, leaning toward the monitor. Spreadsheets, numbers, work on the screen. Christopher worked remotely for his mother's company, Tracy's, doing warehouse accounting $700 a month. Joanna knew the number by heart because Christopher complained regularly that he was underpaid. She never blamed him for earning less. She just took on more freelance work and covered the difference. "Are you going to have dinner?" she asked, placing her hand on his shoulder. Christopher flinched, took off one headphone, and turned around. His face looked tired, unshaven, his eyes red from staring at the screen. "Huh? Yeah, I guess. What are you making?" Chicken with pasta. Okay. He put the headphones back on and returned to the screen. Joanna stood there for a second, then went back to the kitchen. She started cutting the chicken, turned on the burner, and put the pan on the stove. The oil sizzled as she dropped the meat in. The smell spread through the apartment. Familiar. Homey. Stirring the chicken with a wooden spatula, Joanna thought about how they had been living like this for 3 years now. Together, but somehow apart. He at the computer, she in the kitchen. Short, practical conversations. Sex was rare, routine. But this was marriage. This was family. That's how it is for many people, honestly. Joanna didn't complain. They had their own apartment mortgaged, but still theirs. They both had jobs. No debts except the mortgage. That was already a lot. When dinner was ready, she set the table. 2 plates, forks, bread. She called Christopher. He came, sat across from her, and started eating in silence. Joanna ate too, watching her husband out of the corner of her eye. Tall, thin, dark hair messy. He was 31, she was 29. They had met 5 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. Back then, he had seemed calm and reliable. He didn't drink much, didn't smoke, had a job. His mother, Tracy, a single mom, had raised him strict, strong-willed. Joanna was honestly a bit afraid of her, but she tried to get along. Their wedding had been modest, no restaurant. They registered their marriage and celebrated at home with about 15 people. Then they immediately started saving for an apartment. They rented a small place on the outskirts for 2 years and then took out the mortgage. Listen, Joanna said, putting down her fork, I made the payment today. 4 left. Until March. Christopher looked up and nodded. Yeah. Good. Aren't you happy? She smiled, hoping for his support. I am. Of course. Good job. He went back to his plate. Joanna felt a small sting of disappointment but stayed quiet. Maybe he was just tired. She was tired too. No energy for joy. After dinner, Christopher went back to his computer, and Joanna washed the dishes and sat on the couch in the living room with a cup of tea. She turned on the TV but didn't really watch it. Just background noise. She scrolled through her phone, read the news, then social media. Nothing interesting. She put the phone down and started thinking. Over the past few weeks, Christopher had seemed distant. Not exactly cold, but absent. Before, he at least asked how her day was, joked sometimes. Now he was silent more often than usual. And there was something else, his phone. He used to always leave it on the table, screen up, and Joanna sometimes saw who was calling or texting. Nothing secret, just normal life. But for the past 2 weeks, he had been placing his phone face down. Always. In the kitchen, on the table, on the nightstand by the bed. Joanna noticed it by accident at first, but then she couldn't stop noticing. And he had started going out onto the balcony when his mother called. Before, he spoke with Tracy calmly, right there in the kitchen or the room. Joanna heard bits of conversations about work, everyday things. Now, as soon as it was a call from his mother, he would stand up and go out onto the balcony, closing the door behind him. In winter. In the cold. He stood there, shivering, but didn't come back until the call was over. Joanna tried not to read too much into it. Maybe he was having problems at work. Maybe Tracy was sick, and he didn't want to worry Joanna. Maybe it was nothing at all. People change habits, that's normal. But the anxiety stayed. Light, vague, like a splinter under the skin that you can't pull out. She finished her tea, got up, and went to the bedroom. Christopher was still sitting in the other room, the light on. Joanna lay down, pulled the blanket over herself, and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. She lay there thinking about how 4 years was a long time. For years she and Christopher had been carrying this mortgage together, setting up their home together, living together. You'd think they would grow closer. Instead, she felt an invisible wall growing between them, thin, almost transparent, but becoming more solid with each passing day. Joanna remembered how, 4 years ago, they had finalized the apartment purchase. Back then, everything had moved quickly. Paperwork, the bank, the notary. Christopher had said it would be more convenient to register the place in his name. You do freelance work, there could be questions from the tax office, unnecessary hassle, he explained, and Joanna agreed. What difference did it make whose name it was in? They were a family. She would pay, he would work, and the apartment would be theirs together. That was how it was. Tracy had praised her son back then. That's right, Chris. You're the head of the family. It should be in your name. Joanna stayed quiet, even though something inside her flinched. But she didn't argue. There was no reason to. Now, lying in the dark, she thought, was there really no reason? The apartment was in Christopher's name, but she was paying for it. All the payments came from her card, all the receipts were with her. If anything happened, she could prove it was her money. But if anything happened, what was that? A divorce? Joanna shook her head, chasing away the stupid thoughts. Why would there be a divorce? Everything was fine. Just fatigue. Just winter. Just anxiety over nothing. She turned onto her side, pulled the blanket up higher, and forced herself to think about something else. About work. About the quarterly report she had to finish tomorrow. About going to the mall on the weekend to buy herself new jeans, the old ones were completely worn out. About how, in the spring, once the mortgage was paid off, they could go somewhere. Seattle, for example. She had never been there. Neither had Christopher. They could go together, for a week. Not expensive, but at least somewhere. Those thoughts calmed her, and Joanna finally drifted off. Right before falling asleep, she heard Christopher turn off the computer and walk into the bathroom. Water started running. Then he lay down beside her, carefully, trying not to wake her. She didn't move, pretending to be asleep. He turned onto his side, his back to her, and a few minutes later began to snore softly, evenly. Joanna opened her eyes and looked at his back in the dark. Broad shoulders, a familiar outline. For 3 years they had slept like this, side by side, but for some reason now it felt like there was a stranger lying next to her. The next day, she came home from work earlier than usual. They had let her go early since the report was finished. Christopher was already at his computer at home. Joanna said hello, went into the kitchen, put the kettle on, took her green folder out of the cupboard, set it on the table, and opened it. Receipts, payment slips, statements. She went through them slowly, the way people count prayer beads. The 319th payment was the last one. 4 more to go. $9,600. 4 months of work, 4 final payments, and then freedom. Joanna closed the folder and put it back on the shelf. She sat at the table with her tea and looked out the window. Snow was falling outside, fine and dry, spinning in the light of the street lamps. Winter would last a while longer. But spring would come. Spring always comes. She didn't know that in 2 weeks her life would split in two, and everything that seemed solid would crumble like a house of cards. She still believed that everything would be fine. That she and Christopher would make it to March together, pay off the mortgage, and finally start living for real. She believed it, while the phone lying face down on the table in the next room stayed silent. Saturday began as usual. Joanna woke up at 8, even though she hadn't set an alarm. The habit of getting up early had sunk in over years of work, so her body woke up at the same time even on weekends. Christopher was still asleep, lying on his back with his arms spread out, breathing heavily, whistling a little. Joanna quietly got up, put on her robe, and left the bedroom, closing the door behind her. In the kitchen, she turned on the coffee maker, old, inherited from her grandmother, and took the milk out of the fridge. While the coffee was brewing, she stood by the window, looking down into the courtyard. Snow had been falling all night, and now everything was white. Cars, benches, the playground. Down below, a janitor was scraping a path with a shovel, snow flying off in piles. Joanna thought she should go to the store. There was barely any milk left, no bread, and since it was Saturday, she could cook something proper, not rushed like on weekdays. The coffee maker hissed, and Joanna poured herself a cup, big, white, with a chipped rim, one she had been using for about 5 years. She added milk and sugar, stirred. The smell of coffee always calmed her. She took the cup into the living room, sat on the couch, tucking her legs under herself. Silence. Faint music played from the neighbor's apartment through the wall, dull bass barely audible. Joanna took a sip of coffee, hot and scalding, and closed her eyes. She just wanted to sit like this, without thinking about anything. But not thinking didn't work. For the past 2 weeks, the anxiety hadn't let go. Christopher had become even quieter, even more distant. Last night, when Tracy called, he had gone out onto the balcony again. Joanna heard fragments of his voice through the glass but couldn't make out any words. He stood there for about 20 minutes, in just a t-shirt, even though it was freezing outside. He came back red-faced, his fingers icy. Joanna asked what had happened. He answered, nothing. Mom was talking about work. And that was it. He went quiet, went into the room, and closed himself off. Joanna finished her coffee and put the cup on the coffee table. She stood up, stretched, and went into the kitchen. She needed to make a shopping list. She took the sheet of paper held to the fridge with a magnet and started writing. Milk, bread, eggs, butter, potatoes. Then she thought for a moment and added cheese, ham. She could make a casserole. Christopher liked it. A sound came from the bedroom. Christopher was up. Joanna heard him walk into the bathroom. The water turned on. She put the list back on the fridge and went to get dressed. Jeans, a sweater, wool socks. She quickly washed her face and brushed her hair. Christopher came out of the bathroom, nodded at her silently, and went into the kitchen. Joanna heard him open the fridge, take something out, then the cupboard door slammed and dishes clinked. When she came out of the bedroom, Christopher was sitting at the table with a mug of tea and a sandwich, looking at his phone, scrolling through something. Joanna sat down across from him. I'm going to the store. Do you need anything? He didn't look up from the screen. No, nothing. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, maybe we could go together? Take a little walk? No, I've got work. I need to finish a spreadsheet by Monday. On a Saturday? Yeah. Mom asked, it's urgent. Joanna nodded. Of course his mother. With Tracy, everything was always urgent, always important. She stood up, took her bag, and put on her jacket. Okay, I'll be back soon. Christopher mumbled something in response without looking up from his phone. Joanna left the apartment and closed the door quietly, almost without a sound. At the store, she wandered slowly between the aisles, without rushing. She took everything on the list, then added apples and cookies. There was a line at the checkout, and Joanna waited, looking at the backs of the people ahead of her. A woman with a child, a man with a basket full of beer, an elderly woman with 2 loaves of bread. An ordinary Saturday. An ordinary store. Suddenly, Joanna thought that this was how she had been living for 4 years now. Work, home, store. Work, home. The circle had closed. Once, it had seemed like it would be different, that she and Christopher would travel, meet friends, go to movies and cafes. But friends had scattered. Some got married, some moved to other cities, and they were left alone. And being alone together turned out to be more boring than she had expected. After paying, Joanna went outside. The snow had stopped, the sky was gray and low. She walked home slowly, the bag pulling down her arm. On the corner of their building stood a bench, covered in snow. Joanna remembered how 3 years ago she and Christopher had sat on it on a summer evening, eating ice cream, laughing at something. Back then, they still laughed. She climbed up to the 5th floor, caught her breath by the door, took out her keys, opened it and heard Christopher's voice. He was talking in the bedroom, the door slightly open. Joanna stopped without stepping inside. His voice was quiet but clear. What can you do? I'll put up with this ugly woman for another year, until she finishes paying off the mortgage. Joanna froze. The grocery bag slipped from her hand and fell to the floor with a dull thud. Apples rolled down the hallway. She stood there, unable to move, listening. Christopher continued, not hearing the noise. You were right, Mom. I registered the apartment in my name using her money. She'll make the last payment in March, and then we'll get divorced. He laughed. Joanna heard that laugh short, satisfied. I'll take half through the courts. She won't be able to prove it wasn't me paying. Silence. Tracy was saying something on the other end. Joanna couldn't hear the words, only the approving, firm tone. Come on, Mom, don't worry. Everything's under control. 4 more months and I'm free. Her money, my apartment. Nice, right? Joanna took a step back. Her back hit the door. Breathing was hard, the air stuck in her throat. Slowly, she bent down, picked up the bag, and set it against the wall. The apples stayed on the floor. She made her way to the kitchen, holding onto the wall because her legs felt weak, and sat down on a chair. The cup of morning coffee was still on the table. Joanna picked it up, brought it to her lips, but didn't drink. Her hands were shaking. The cup clinked against the saucer. She put it back and clenched her fingers into fists to stop the trembling. Ugly. He had called her ugly. For 4 years, she had worked 2 jobs, paid for the apartment, saved on herself. And he called her ugly. For 4 years, he had been waiting for her to make the final payment so he could divorce her and take half. All this time, he had simply been putting up with her. Putting up with her and counting the days. Joanna covered her face with her hands. She wanted to scream, but the scream got stuck somewhere inside, a heavy, burning lump. She sat like that for several minutes, then unclenched her fingers and looked at her hands. Ordinary hands. Dry, with short nails, a callus on the middle finger of her right hand from holding a pen. Hands that for 4 years had tapped on a keyboard, counted money, signed documents. Christopher's voice came from the bedroom. He was saying goodbye to his mother. Then the door creaked, and he came out into the hallway. Joanna heard him pick up the apples and toss them onto the small table by the door. Then he walked into the kitchen. Oh, you're back. I didn't hear you. Joanna lifted her head and looked at him. Christopher stood in the doorway, in sweatpants and a t-shirt, unshaven, with messy hair. An ordinary, familiar husband. Yes, she said. I'm back. He nodded and walked to the fridge, opened it, looked inside. Are you going to cook something for lunch? I am. Well, that's good. I'll work for now. He took a bottle of water and went back into the room. Joanna stayed sitting in the kitchen, staring at the doorway where he had just been. Then she looked at the cup of coffee. Half finished. Cold. She picked it up and carried it toward the sink, but halfway there she stopped and put it back on the table. Let it stay. The rest of the day passed like in a fog. Joanna cooked lunch, cut potatoes and meat, put everything on the stove, stirred. She did everything automatically, without thinking. Christopher came to the table when she called him. He ate silently, quickly. Then he said he would go to his mother's in the evening. She needed help with her computer. Joanna nodded. He left at 6, the door slammed. Joanna was alone. She sat down on the couch in the living room and picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts and stopped on a name. Lisa, a friend from college. They rarely saw each other now, maybe once every 6 months, talked on the phone sometimes. But right now, Joanna needed to talk to someone. She tapped call. Lisa answered after the 3rd ring. Joanna, hi. I haven't heard from you in ages. Hi, Lisa. How are you? Oh, you know, fine. Busy. Work, kids. How about you? Joanna wanted to say everything was fine. She wanted to lie, like always. But she couldn't. Lisa, I'm in a situation right now. Can I tell you about it? Lisa immediately became serious, her voice quieter. Of course. Go ahead. Joanna told her. Briefly, without extra details. About the mortgage, about the apartment being in Christopher's name, about the conversation she overheard. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper, as if she were afraid someone might hear. Lisa stayed silent while she listened. Then she exhaled. Damn, Joanna. That's insane. Are you sure you heard everything correctly? I'm sure. I recorded it. Recorded it? How? I turned on the voice recorder on my phone and left it in the bedroom when he was talking to his mother again. On purpose. Lisa whistled. Wow. And what are you going to do now? I don't know. That's why I'm calling. Lisa was quiet for a moment, thinking. Listen, do you have documents? Payment slips, receipts? All of them. Every dollar from my card. Then the court will help you. You'll prove that you paid. The apartment won't be split 50-50, it'll be divided fairly. But it's registered in his name. Christopher said I wouldn't be able to prove it. He's an idiot. Everything can be proven now. Bank statements, receipts, witnesses if there are any. You're an accountant, you know this better than I do. Joanna thought about it. Yes, she knew. But court meant time, scandals, lawyers. And Tracy would hire a good lawyer. Joanna had no doubt about that. And if not through court, she asked quietly. What do you mean, not through court? Well, if I make it so that he gives the apartment up himself. Lisa laughed, not believing it. Joanna, what are you talking about? He's not stupid. Why would he give it away? I don't know. I'm just thinking for now. They talked for about 10 more minutes, then said goodbye. Before hanging up, Lisa said, just don't do anything stupid. And call me if anything happens. Joanna promised. After hanging up, she sat there, hugging her knees and staring at the wall. There were several options. The first was to start a fight right now. Lay everything out, demand a divorce. But then there would be court, division of property, and no one knew how it would end. The second option was to stay silent, finish paying off the mortgage, and then, when he filed for divorce, present all the evidence in court. But that was also a risk, and it meant living next to him for 4 more months, knowing everything. And the third option, Joanna remembered Lisa's words, was to make him give up the apartment himself. It sounded like fantasy, but why not? If he was planning to deceive her, why couldn't she deceive him? She stood up, went into the kitchen, took the green folder from the shelf. She spread the payment slips, receipts, and statements out on the table. $133,000. All from her card. All hers. Christopher hadn't paid a single dollar. His $1,700 a month went to his personal expenses. Clothes, gadgets, a car he never actually bought. Joanna took a sheet of paper and a pen. She started writing. At first, just thoughts, then a plan. What needed to be done? Transfer the apartment into her name. How? A gift deed. Who had to sign? Christopher. How to make him sign? Trick him. She stopped and looked at what she had written. Tricking her husband. It sounded dirty. But wasn't what he had been doing for 4 years dirty? He had used her as a cash cow, planned to dump her and take half on top of that. And she was supposed to just accept it? No. She wasn't. Joanna kept writing. A gift deed is done through a notary. The donor's signature is required, that is, Christopher's. How to get the signature? She remembered, for 3 years in a row, he had signed her tax documents when she filed freelance paperwork. Not once had he read what he was signing. He just signed where she pointed. That had been enough for work. So she needed to prepare the gift agreement, hide it among other documents, and ask him to sign. He wouldn't read it. Then the notary would certify it, and the apartment would be hers. Joanna leaned back in her chair. The plan sounded crazy, but realistic. She picked up her phone, opened the browser, typed, apartment gift deed sample. Links popped up. She read, made notes. Then she typed, can a gift deed be challenged? She read more. If he tried to challenge the gift, she would present the recording, and then he wouldn't be able to get out of it. Joanna put the phone down, stood up, paced the kitchen. Her heart was racing, her temples pounding. It was scary. But it was right. She wouldn't be a victim. She would take what was hers. Christopher came back late that evening, around 11. He smelled of cold air and cigarettes. Apparently he had smoked at his mother's place, even though he never smoked at home. Joanna was lying on the couch, watching TV. He walked past and tossed out, "Good night," and shut himself in the bedroom. Joanna didn't answer. She waited until he fell asleep. Then she got up and quietly went into the bedroom. Christopher was sleeping on his side, the blanket pulled over his head. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen down. Joanna carefully picked it up and stepped into the hallway. The phone was locked. She knew the password, their wedding date. He had never changed it. She entered the numbers, the screen unlocked. She opened the call log. The last call was Tracy, an hour ago, 23 minutes. Joanna opened the messages. The conversation with his mother over the past few weeks was long. She scrolled. There it was. Chris, I'm serious, don't show her anything. The apartment is in your name, she won't prove anything. The main thing is that the last payment goes through, and then file for divorce right away. I'll find a good lawyer. Christopher's reply, Mom, don't worry, everything's covered. She's stupid, she won't suspect a thing. Joanna read it, and everything inside her went cold. Stupid. He thought she was stupid. For 4 years. All this time. She went back into the bedroom, put the phone back on the nightstand, and left. She closed the door, went into the kitchen, turned on the light, sat down at the table, and opened her laptop. She typed into the search bar, Notary's City Gift Deed Apartment. She chose the first one on the list and wrote down the address and phone number. Tomorrow was Sunday. On Monday, she would call and make an appointment. There was little time, she had to do everything quickly before Christopher suspected anything. She opened a text editor and started drafting the gift agreement. She downloaded a template and filled it in. Donor, Christopher. Recipient, Joanna. Subject of the gift, the apartment at such and such address. She would print it at work tomorrow, then prepare more documents, freelance certificates, reports, miscellaneous paperwork. She would hide the agreement in the middle. Christopher would sign without looking. Was it fair? Maybe. Was it right? She didn't know. But there was no other way. On Sunday morning, Joanna got up early, got dressed, and left the apartment without waking Christopher. She needed to think, to be alone. She walked through snow-covered streets, breathing in the frosty air, and little by little her thoughts became clearer. The plan was ready. Now she had to act. On Monday, sitting at work, she called the notary. She made an appointment for Saturday at 10 in the morning. She said she needed to arrange a gift of an apartment from husband to wife. The notary, a woman with a dull voice, asked whether both would be present. Joanna replied that her husband would sign at home and she would bring the documents. The notary paused, then said, Well, in principle, it's possible. A notarized signature or personal presence is required. Joanna clarified, and if he signs in front of me, and I record it on video? That's possible too, but it's better if he comes himself. He can't, he's busy. Let me come alone, we'll do everything properly. The notary agreed reluctantly. Joanna hung up, her heart pounding. She opened the file with the agreement and checked all the details again. Everything was correct. She printed 3 copies at work and hid them in a folder. That evening at home, she started preparing documents for the tax office: real freelance income statements, certificates of completed work, invoices. About 20 pages in total. She slipped the gift agreement in as the second page, between a certificate and an act. The text was small, legal, indistinguishable from the rest of the paperwork routine. Christopher never read what he signed. He wouldn't read it now either. On Tuesday evening, she rehearsed. She spread the papers out on the table, thought through what she would say, where she would point. Sign here, here, and here. 3 places. The agreement was the second one. He wouldn't notice. On Wednesday evening, Christopher was home, sitting at his computer. Joanna went into the room and said casually, Listen, on Saturday morning you'll need to sign some documents for my freelance work. The tax office requires the spouse's signature on a few forms. It's just a formality, but without your signature they won't accept them. Christopher didn't even look up from the screen. Okay. Just early, all right? I'll get up at 10. Fine. Joanna left the room. Her hands were shaking. It worked. He agreed. Thursday and Friday dragged on endlessly. Joanna worked, but her thoughts were far away. She replayed the plan in her head again and again. What could go wrong? What if Christopher suddenly decided to read? No, he never read anything. What if the notary refused? No, she had already agreed. What if Christopher later tried to challenge the gift? Possible. But she had the recording. That was her trump card. On Friday night, Joanna barely slept. She lay next to Christopher, listening to his snoring, thinking, tomorrow. Tomorrow everything would be decided. Saturday morning. Joanna got up at 8, even though she had told Christopher 10. She got dressed, washed her face, drank coffee standing in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. She took out the folder with the documents and checked everything one more time. The agreement was there. Everything was correct. At 9, she woke Christopher. He woke up annoyed, sleepy. You said 10. Sorry, I mixed it up. I need to get them in before lunch. He grumbled but got up. Washed, got dressed, came into the kitchen. Joanna was already sitting at the table with the documents laid out. Christopher sat across from her and yawned. All right, where do I sign? Joanna slid the stack closer and pointed to the first page. Here. Christopher took the pen and signed with a broad stroke, without looking. Joanna turned the page and showed him the second one, the gift agreement. And here. Christopher signed again. Joanna flipped to the third page. And here, the last one. The third signature. Done. Christopher leaned back in his chair and stretched. That it? Yes, thank you. Good. I'll go back to sleep. He stood up and went back to the bedroom. Joanna stayed sitting at the table, staring at the signed agreement. It was done. He had signed it. Now to the notary. She carefully put the documents into the folder, put on her jacket, and left the apartment. Outside it was cold and sunny. Joanna walked fast, almost running. The notary's office was downtown, on the third floor of an old building. Joanna climbed the stairs and opened the door with the signed notary. Inside it was warm, smelled of paper and coffee. A woman in her 50s, wearing glasses and looking strict, sat at the desk. She looked up at Joanna. Joanna? Yes. Come in, have a seat. Joanna sat down, took out the folder, and handed over the agreement. The notary took it and began to read. She read for a long time, carefully, then looked up. Is your husband aware that he's gifting you the apartment? Joanna nodded. Yes. We agreed. Why didn't he come himself? He's busy. Work. The notary looked at her closely. Joanna held her gaze. The notary sighed. All right. Do you have the apartment documents? Joanna took them out, the ownership certificate, the mortgage agreement, a bank statement showing the remaining balance. The notary checked everything and nodded. Then she took out her stamp, stamped the agreement, signed it, and handed it to Joanna. This is your copy. The registration will be submitted electronically. It will take effect in 3 business days on Tuesday. Thank you. Joanna took the document and put it into the folder. She paid $200 for the notary's services and went outside. Her legs felt weak. She leaned against the wall of the building and closed her eyes. Done. The agreement was certified. In 3 days, the apartment would be hers. She returned home an hour later. Christopher was still asleep. Joanna hid the agreement in her green folder, all the way at the bottom, under the payment receipts. Then she sat in the kitchen and drank some water. Her hands were still shaking, but now from relief. The rest of Saturday passed as usual. Christopher got up around lunchtime, ate, and sat down at the computer. Joanna cooked, cleaned, watched TV. In the evening, he said he was going to his mother's. He left at 6. Joanna stayed alone. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, thinking about what came next. On Tuesday, the apartment would be hers. But Christopher didn't know that yet. She needed to tell him. How? When? And then it hit her. Their wedding anniversary. It was a month and a half away, but she could say she wanted to celebrate early. A festive dinner, like before. And then, at the table, she would place an envelope in front of him. With the gift agreement inside. Let him open it in front of her. Let him see that his plan had failed. Joanna stood up and walked around the room. Yes. That's what she would do. On Sunday evening, she would make dinner. Say she wanted to celebrate their anniversary. Christopher wouldn't refuse, he loved good food. And she would cook everything he liked, set the table, and hand him the envelope. Sunday. Joanna woke up with a clear head. The plan was ready. She waited until Christopher woke up, then said over breakfast, "Listen, let's celebrate our anniversary tonight. Early, I mean. I want something festive. I'm tired of all this gray routine." Christopher raised his eyebrows, surprised. "But the anniversary is still a month and a half away." "So what? We'll celebrate in advance. You don't mind, do you?" He shrugged. "I don't mind." "Sure." Joanna smiled. "Great. I'll make something nice." During the day she went to the store. Bought meat, pork tenderloin. Christopher loved it, vegetables, wine. At home she started cooking. Marinated the meat with spices, cut potatoes, made a salad, set the table. A white tablecloth, good dishes, candles. Like in the old days, when they were still happy. Or pretended to be happy. Joanna took the gift agreement out of the folder, the printed transcript of the recorded conversation on a separate sheet, and the full list of mortgage payments. She put everything into a white envelope, sealed it, and wrote on it, "Christopher." She placed the envelope on the table next to her wine glass. By 6 in the evening everything was ready. Joanna called Christopher to the table. He came out of the room, looked at the table, and whistled. "Wow. Like a restaurant. Sit down." They sat across from each other. Joanna poured the wine and raised her glass. "To us. To 4 years of marriage. To everything that was." Christopher clinked glasses with her and drank. Joanna took a sip too, but the wine tasted sour. She set the glass down and slid the envelope toward Christopher. "This is for you. A gift." Christopher took the envelope in surprise and turned it over in his hands. "What is this?" "Open it." He opened the envelope, took out the papers, and started reading. At first he didn't understand, frowned, then went pale. His face stretched. He flipped through the pages. The gift agreement. His signature. The list of payments. The printed transcript. His hands began to shake. "What is this?" His voice broke. Joanna answered calmly, looking him straight in the eyes, "These are documents confirming that the apartment is now mine. You signed the gift agreement yourself on Saturday morning when I asked you to sign documents for my freelance taxes. The notary finalized everything. The registration has already been submitted, and it takes effect on Tuesday." Christopher jumped up, the chair crashing to the floor behind him. "Are you out of your mind? I didn't know what I was signing." Joanna took out her phone and played the recording. Christopher's voice filled the room. "What can you do? I'll put up with this ugly woman for another year, until she finishes paying off the mortgage." Tracy's voice followed. "I'll take half through the courts. She won't be able to prove it wasn't me paying." The recording lasted 3 minutes. Christopher listened. His face was gray, his lips tight. Joanna turned the recording off. "I recorded your conversation with Tracy. About the ugly woman and a year of putting up with me. Want to challenge the gift? Go ahead. I'll submit the recording as proof of your intent to commit fraud." She opened the green folder, took out the payment receipts, and spread them across the table like a fan. "Every receipt. Every payment from my card over 4 years. $133,000 of my money. And you were earning $1,700 a month and planned to split the apartment in half." Christopher grabbed his phone, his fingers shaking as he fumbled with the buttons. He called his mother, shouting into the phone, his voice cracking. "Mom, she tricked me. She transferred the apartment to herself. Come over. Now." Tracy was shouting back. Her voice was loud enough to hear through the speaker. Christopher listened, nodded, then barked. "Come here," I said. He threw the phone onto the table and stared at Joanna. "You'll regret this." Joanna shook her head. "No. You will." The next 40 minutes dragged on painfully. Christopher paced around the apartment, sitting down, standing up, grabbing the documents, rereading them, throwing them back. Joanna sat at the table, untouched food in front of her, watching him. Inside, there was emptiness. No triumph. No gloating. Just emptiness. Finally, the doorbell rang. Christopher rushed to open it. Tracy burst into the apartment like a storm. Tall, heavy-set, in an expensive shearling coat, her face red from the cold and rage. "Where's that bitch?" She stormed into the kitchen, saw Joanna, and pointed at her. "What have you done? This is fraud." Joanna stood up and answered quietly but firmly, "Fraud is when your son spent 4 years planning to take half of an apartment that I paid for on my own." She handed over the phone with the recording. Tracy listened, her expression changing from fury to confusion, then to understanding. The recording ended. Tracy slammed the phone onto the table. "We'll challenge this. You tricked him into signing." Joanna shook her head. "The registration office won't cancel a gift without serious grounds. My recording proves that you plan to take an apartment bought with my money. That's called intent. The judge will listen to the recording and ask one simple question: why did a husband earning $1,700 want half of a $133,000 apartment?" Tracy tried to push further. "You'll regret this. We'll find a way." Joanna walked to the door and opened it. "Get out. Both of you. This is my apartment. I paid for every square foot. Christopher, pack your things. Tonight." Christopher stood in the middle of the kitchen, confused, broken. He muttered something about rights, about court. Joanna placed a printed sheet in front of him, the contact details of a lawyer she had found through Lisa. "Here's a lawyer. If you want to go to court, go ahead. I'll show the judge the recordings, the receipts, the witnesses. You won't just lose, you'll become a cautionary tale." Tracy grabbed her son by the arm and dragged him toward the exit. "Come on. There's nothing for us here." Christopher followed her obediently. He came back 10 minutes later with a bag, threw in clothes, documents, his phone charger. Joanna stood by the door, watching silently. He walked past her without looking and went out into the hallway. Tracy was the last to leave. "You'll hear from me," she threw over her shoulder. "Goodbye, Tracy," Joanna replied and closed the door. Click. Joanna stood by the closed door, listening to their footsteps fade away. The elevator hummed and went down. Silence. She ran her palm over the door, then fastened the chain. It clicked softly, and for some reason that sound calmed her. She went back into the kitchen. The table was set, candles still burning, the meat cold. A festive dinner no one had eaten. Joanna blew out the candles and started clearing the table. Plates into the sink, wine poured out she didn't want to drink. She packed the meat into a container and put it in the fridge. Her hands moved automatically, washing, wiping, putting things away. When the table was clean, she sat down on a chair and rested her head on her arms. 4 years. All 4 of those years had been a lie. Christopher didn't love her. Maybe once, at the very beginning, there had been something. Or maybe not. Maybe he had been calculating everything from the start. Joanna tried to remember how they had started. A friend's birthday party 5 years ago. Christopher had sat down next to her in the kitchen while she was washing glasses. The hostess had asked her to help. They started talking. He was polite, calm, asked what she did and where she worked. When he found out she was an accountant, he perked up. "Oh, that's a useful profession. I'm terrible with numbers." She laughed back then. Later he asked for her number. Called 2 days later. Invited her to the movies. Joanna got up, went into the living room, and lay down on the couch. She kept remembering. They dated for 6 months before he suggested moving in together. At the time she was renting a room, and he still lived with his mother. "Let's rent an apartment together," he said. "It'll be cheaper that way." She agreed. They rented a small 1-bedroom on the outskirts. Lived there for 2 years. Christopher worked at his mother's company and didn't make much, but Joanna didn't mind. She earned a decent amount, enough for both of them. Then he started talking about a mortgage. "Why keep paying rent? Let's buy our own place." Joanna supported the idea. They started saving for a down payment. Mostly she saved. Christopher said he was putting money aside for a car. When they had enough, they went to the bank. The mortgage was approved quickly. Joanna was officially employed with a long work history. Christopher was officially employed too, but with little time on the job and a low salary. The bank counted mostly her income. They found a 3-bedroom apartment downtown, not a new building, but in good condition. Final price, $142,560. A 10-year loan. Then, during the paperwork, Christopher said, "Let's register it in my name. You do freelance work, the tax office might hassle you." Back then, Joanna didn't argue. What difference did it make? Now she understood there was a difference. He had calculated everything in advance. Maybe not from the very beginning, but definitely by the time they bought the apartment. He registered it in his name so that later, after she paid it off, he could take half through the courts. And his mother knew. Tracy was in on it. Maybe she had even suggested the whole plan. "That's right, Chris. You're the head of the family." Her words back then, for years ago. Joanna had stayed silent, but she should have been alarmed. She closed her eyes. She wanted to cry, but there were no tears. Only emptiness and exhaustion. Tomorrow was Monday work. The day after, on Tuesday, the notification would come from the registration office. The apartment would officially be hers. For now, she just had to make it to Tuesday. Joanna barely slept that night. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to music playing through the wall from the neighbors. Then the music stopped, the city grew quiet, and only now and then a car passed below, whispering over the snow. Toward morning she drifted off, but it was restless, broken with scraps of nightmares. Christopher came back with the police. The notary said she'd made a mistake. Tracy burst into the apartment holding a crowbar. She woke to her alarm at 7. Got up with a heavy head and puffy eyes. Washed her face with cold water, brewed strong coffee, drank it standing up. Got dressed, grabbed her bag, and left. The stairwell smelled of tobacco and dampness. The elevator took her down to the first floor, the doors opened, and Joanna stepped outside. The cold hit her face, the air sharp and clean. She took a deep breath and walked to the bus stop. Work was quiet and ordinary Monday. Joanna sat at her computer, opened spreadsheets, started matching invoices. Her fingers clicked over the keyboard out of habit, numbers flashing on the screen. Work distracted her, and that was good. At lunch, she went down to the cafeteria, got soup and tea, and sat by the window. She ate slowly, staring out at the street. Snow started again, big, wet flakes that melted on the asphalt. "Joanna, what's going on with you?" a voice beside her said. She flinched and turned. Allison, a co-worker from the neighboring department, stood there with a tray. "Nothing. Just didn't sleep." "Can I sit?" Allison sat across from her and started eating. They were quiet. Then Allison asked, "Are you okay? You seem—" "I don't know. Lost." Joanna looked up. Allison's face was kind, worried. She was about 35, married, 2 kids, always friendly. Joanna sometimes envied her calm, steady life. "I'm fine. Just tired. If you need anything, say so. You can always talk." "Thanks." Allison nodded, finished her soup, and left. Joanna stayed where she was. Finished her tea, went back upstairs, returned to work. The day dragged. At 6 she shut down her computer, got dressed, and went outside. She didn't want to go home. The empty apartment, the silence, the thoughts. But there was nowhere else to go. At home she took off her jacket, kicked off her boots, went into the kitchen, opened the fridge. The container with the meat was on the top shelf. Joanna took it out, opened it, and looked. Yesterday's celebration dinner that never happened. She closed it and put it back. Took out a yogurt, grabbed a spoon, sat down at the table. Ate slowly, without appetite. After dinner she lay on the couch and turned on the TV. Flipped channels without watching. Then turned it off, picked up her phone, opened messages. Nothing from Christopher. Nothing from Tracy. Silence. Joanna opened her photo gallery and scrolled. There they were, her and Christopher at their wedding 4 years ago. both smiling, hugging. She in a simple white dress, he in a suit. Tracy was there too, smiling with a glass in her hand. Everyone looked happy. Or pretended to. Then photos from the apartment when they had just moved in. Empty rooms, boxes everywhere. They were sitting on the living room floor eating pizza. Christopher was showing something on his phone. Joanna was laughing. Was any of that real? Or was he already pretending back then? Joanna closed the gallery, set the phone beside her, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Tuesday. Tomorrow the notification would come. The apartment would be hers. But for some reason there was no joy. Only exhaustion and a strange sense of loss. For years of life thrown away. For years where she believed she was building a family, but was really building an illusion. That night, the nightmares came again. Christopher returned and said the gift had been canceled, that she had to move out. Tracy stood beside him, smirking. Joanna tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work. The words got stuck in her throat. She woke up drenched in cold sweat, sat on the couch hugging her knees. The clock read 3 a.m. Outside was darkness, the city asleep. Joanna got up, went into the kitchen, poured water, drank it in one gulp. Then she went back to the couch, pulled a blanket over herself, and lay there with her eyes open for a long time until she finally drifted off again into another anxious sleep. Tuesday morning she got up feeling wrecked, but with one clear thought: today everything would be decided. She got dressed, drank coffee, and went to work. All day she checked her phone every half hour, waiting for the registration notice. It was supposed to arrive by email, the notary had said. But the morning passed, lunch passed, and no message came. At 3 o'clock Joanna couldn't stand it anymore and called the notary's office. A secretary answered. "Good afternoon, notary office." "Hello. This is Joanna Craddock. I processed an apartment gift on Saturday. You said the registration would go through on Tuesday. I'm supposed to receive a notice." "One moment. Yes, I see it. The registration was completed today at 10 a.m. The notice was sent to your email. I didn't receive anything. Check your spam. Or go to the registration service website. You can download the extract there." "Okay, thank you." Joanna hung up and opened her email on her phone. Checked inbox, nothing. Opened spam. There it was, an email from the registration service. It had arrived at 10:17 a.m. Subject line, property ownership registration completed. Joanna opened it and downloaded the attachment. The extract. Property, the apartment at that address. Owner, Joanna Craddock. Registration date, today's date. Done. The apartment was officially hers. Joanna locked her phone and leaned back in her chair. Around her, the office buzzed, coworkers talking, phones ringing, the printer humming. An ordinary workday. And her life had flipped upside down. After work, she stopped by the store and bought bread, milk, eggs. Walked home slowly, out of habit, counting her steps. 320 steps from the store to the building entrance. She had counted them every day for 4 years. She went up to the 5th floor and unlocked the door. She hadn't changed the locks yet. There was no point rushing. At home, she took off her coat, went into the kitchen, and put the kettle on. She took the green folder from the shelf and opened it on the table. Payment slips, receipts, bank statements, and now also the extract from the registration service. Joanna had printed it on her home printer, slipped it into the folder, and closed it. The documents were in order. The apartment was hers, everything was legal. She poured herself some tea and sat by the window. Outside, evening was settling in, streetlights turning on one by one. The snow had stopped, the sky was clear and dark. Joanna sipped her tea slowly and thought about what came next. Christopher hadn't called. Neither had Tracy. Maybe they understood the case was lost. Or maybe they were preparing a counterattack. Joanna didn't know, but she was ready for anything. On Wednesday morning, just as she was getting ready for work, the doorbell rang. Sharp, insistent. Joanna froze with her bag in her hands. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Tracy was standing on the landing. Alone. Her face was serious, no rage, but firm. Joanna opened the door without removing the chain. What do you want? Tracy looked her up and down. To talk. Let me in. Say it here. Joanna, I'm not your enemy. Let me in, let's talk like adults. Joanna hesitated. Then she took off the chain and opened the door. Tracy walked in, took off her coat, went straight into the kitchen like she owned the place, sat down at the table, and folded her hands in front of her. Joanna stayed standing by the door. Well? Joanna asked. Tracy sighed. I came to make a deal. About what? You understand that Christopher can challenge the gift. Yes, you have the recording, but a lawyer will find loopholes. They'll say the phrase was taken out of context, that Christopher was joking, that the recording is illegal. The court might side with him. Joanna shook her head. Maybe. Or maybe not. I'll take the risk. Tracy leaned forward. Why do you need a court case? Why the stress, the time, the money? Let's settle this peacefully. You give Christopher half the value of the apartment, and he won't challenge the gift. Joanna laughed. Short and bitter. Half the value? I paid a loan for 4 years, and he wants half? For what? He's your husband. You were married. By law, property is joint. The apartment is registered to me under a gift agreement. A gift excludes property from marital assets. I checked. Tracy pressed her lips together. You acted dirty. Me? Dirty? Joanna stepped forward, her voice rising. Your son planned to screw me over for 4 years. You and he planned to take half of an apartment I paid for alone. And you're talking to me about being dirty? Tracy stood up. Christopher made a mistake. He admits it. But you're no saint either. You deceived him. Made him sign papers without knowing what they were. He deceived me first. For 4 years he called me ugly. Put up with me for money. Do you think that doesn't hurt? Do you think I didn't love him? Joanna stopped short. Had she loved Christopher? Now? After everything? Or had she loved an illusion she created herself? Tracy looked at her closely. You loved him? I don't know. Probably. Once. Tracy was silent for a moment, then sat back down and motioned for Joanna to sit across from her. Joanna sat. I'm not justifying Christopher, Tracy said more quietly. He was wrong. I'm also to blame I pushed him. But understand, I'm a mother. I want my son to have something of his own. I raised him alone. His father left us when Chris was 5. I worked 2 jobs to get him on his feet. He's my only child, and I was afraid that you'd take everything from him. Joanna listened and suddenly saw Tracy differently, not as a threatening mother-in-law, but as a tired woman trying to protect her son. Wrongly, unfairly, but protect him. I didn't take anything from him, Joanna said quietly. I paid for the apartment with my own money for 4 years. He didn't put in a single dollar. Why should I give him half? Tracy nodded. I understand. But you could have talked to him, said you wanted to transfer it properly. You could have divided things fairly. Instead, you chose deception. He chose deception first. 2 deceptions don't make the truth. Joanna leaned back in her chair. She was tired of arguing. Tracy sighed. All right. I see you won't agree. But think about it. Christopher will file a lawsuit. I have connections, a good lawyer. We'll find a way to challenge the gift. Maybe we won't win, but we'll make your life miserable. Hearings, stress, expenses. Do you really need that? Joanna looked her straight in the eyes. Yes. I won't back down. Tracy stood up and took her bag. A pity. I hoped you'd be smarter. She walked to the door and put on her coat. At the threshold, she turned around. You know, Joanna, I was wrong about you. I thought you were quiet and soft, but you turned out to have a spine. Maybe in another situation, we could have gotten along. Joanna said nothing. Tracy left. The door closed. Joanna stood in the hallway. What was this? It wasn't fair. But what he did wasn't fair either. Where was the line? Who was right? Joanna looked up at the clock. 8:30. She was going to be late for work. She grabbed her bag and left the apartment. On the way to work, she thought about the conversation. Tracy hadn't come for nothing. She had been testing the waters, seeing if a deal was possible. Joanna refused. That meant there would be a court case. Fine. She had all the evidence receipts, the recording, the registration extract. Let him sue. She wasn't afraid. But that evening, when she came home, there was a letter in the mailbox. Joanna took it out and opened it as she walked up the stairs. An official court notice. Plaintiff, Christopher Craddock. Defendant, Joanna Craddock. Claim, to declare the gift agreement invalid and divide marital property. Hearing date, in 1 month. Joanna finished reading, folded the letter, and slipped it into her pocket. She went into the apartment, took off her coat, went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, sat down at the table, took the letter out, and read it again. So fast. She thought they would stall, prepare. But they filed immediately. Tracy hadn't been bluffing about connections. Fine. A court hearing in a month. Time to prepare. Joanna picked up her phone and called Lisa. Hi, Joanna. How are you? Lisa, I have a court case in a month. Christopher is challenging the gift. You said you knew a good lawyer? Yes. Do you have money? Joanna thought. She did savings she'd set aside once the mortgage was almost paid off. $5,000. It should be enough. I do. Good. I'll send you the number. Call today and explain everything. The lawyer's solid, specializes in family law. He'll get you through this. Thank you, Lisa. 5 minutes later, a message came through with a name and number, Libby Pratt. Joanna dialed the number. The call was answered after the second ring. Hello. Hello. My name is Joanna Craddock. Lisa Woods gave me your number. I have a court case and need legal help. Yes, Lisa warned me you might call. Briefly tell me what the case is about. Joanna explained concisely, sticking to the facts, the mortgage, the apartment registered in her husband's name, his plan to divorce her and take half, the overheard conversation, the gift agreement he signed without reading, and the lawsuit. Libby listened without interrupting. When Joanna finished, she was silent for a few seconds. The situation is complicated. Essentially, you misled your husband into signing a contract without explaining what it was. That could work against you. But I have a recording where he himself planned fraud. The recording is good, but the question is whether the court will accept it. If it was made without the other party's consent, it may be ruled inadmissible. Joanna felt everything inside tighten. So the recording won't help? It might help if we can prove you acted to protect your legal rights. Also, you have payment documents confirming that you paid the mortgage. That's a strong argument. Overall, you do have a chance, but we'll need to prepare very carefully. Will you take the case? I will. My fee is $4,000 to handle the case through the court decision. Appeals would be discussed separately. Do you agree? I agree. Good. Come to the office tomorrow. We'll go over the details and sign the contract. I'll send you the address by text. Thank you. Joanna hung up. $4,000. More than half her savings. But there was no other choice. She stood up and walked around the kitchen. She needed to gather all the documents, receipts, bank statements, the recording, the gift agreement, the marriage certificate. She would bring everything to the lawyer tomorrow. She spent the evening sorting through papers, laying them out on the table, checking them, putting them back. Everything was there. The evidence was solid. She had paid $133,000. He had paid nothing. She paid, he waited for her to finish. The court should be on her side. That night, the nightmares returned. The courtroom. The judge reading the decision, the gift declared invalid, the apartment split in half. Christopher smirking. Tracy nodding in satisfaction. Joanna shouting that it wasn't fair, but no one listening. She woke at 6 a.m., drenched in sweat. Got up, washed her face, got dressed. At 8, she headed to the lawyer's office. The office was downtown, on the second floor of a business center. Joanna went up and rang the doorbell marked Legal Consulting. A young receptionist opened the door and led her into an office. Libby Pratt turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s, wearing a business suit, with short hair and an attentive gaze. She shook Joanna's hand and invited her to sit. They spent 2 hours reviewing the documents. Libby read the receipts, listened to the recording, asked questions, then leaned back in her chair. The picture is clear. You paid the mortgage alone. Your husband planned to divorce you and take half. You got ahead of him by formalizing the gift. He's now suing to have the gift declared invalid. His main argument will be that you misled him into signing without explaining what it was. What can I argue in response? First, the payment documents. They prove the mortgage was paid by you, meaning the apartment was effectively bought with your money. Second, the recording. It shows that your husband himself planned fraud, which weakens the moral weight of his claims. Third, the gift was notarized and the procedure was followed. That makes it difficult to challenge. But he'll say I tricked him. He will. The question is whether the judge believes him. If we show that you acted to protect your rights, the court may side with you. And if it doesn't? Libby shrugged. Then the gift will be declared invalid and the apartment will be divided. Even then, you can claim a larger share since you paid the mortgage alone. 50-50 is unlikely. More like 70-30 in your favor. Joanna nodded. 70% was better than 50. But she wanted 100. She had paid for the apartment. Every dollar was hers. I want 100%, she said firmly. Libby smiled. Then get ready to fight. It won't be easy. They signed the contract. Joanna paid half the fee up front $2,000. Libby promised to prepare their court strategy and gather all the arguments. Joanna left the office feeling that at least something was moving forward. She had a lawyer. She had a plan. Now she just had to wait for court. The next 3 weeks passed in tense anticipation. Joanna worked, came home, cooked dinner, watched TV, went to bed. Routine. Only now the apartment was quiet. No one sat at a computer in the next room. No one stepped out onto the balcony to talk to his mother. Loneliness. Joanna got used to it slowly. Sometimes she caught herself listening had the door opened, had Christopher come back? Then she remembered he wouldn't. This was her apartment. Only hers. A week before the court date, Libby called. Joanna, there's news. The plaintiff's side is offering a settlement. What kind? Christopher agrees not to challenge the gift if you pay him compensation $30,000. Joanna was silent. $30,000? For what? For the fact that the apartment was registered in his name and he held ownership rights. Formally, it's compensation for waiving those rights. He didn't pay a single dollar. Why should I pay him? You shouldn't. It's an offer. You can refuse and go to court. But if the court sides with him and invalidates the gift, you'll have to split the apartment. That $70,000 to him may be more. Joanna thought. $30,000 or $70,000? Or nothing at all if she won. A risk. I'll think about it. Okay. I need your answer by Friday. Joanna hung up. $30,000. She didn't have that kind of money. Her savings were almost gone. $2,000 paid to the lawyer, another $2,000 due after the trial. Where could she get $30,000? A loan? Borrow? From whom? She called Lisa. Lisa, they're offering a settlement. $30,000 to Christopher, and he drops the challenge. And what do you think? I don't know. I don't have that kind of money. And if you lose in court? Then I lose half the apartment. Lisa was silent for a moment. Joanna, if I were you, I'd take the risk. Your position is strong. The payment records, the recording. Does your lawyer say you have a chance? She does. Then go to court. Don't give him a single dollar. Joanna exhaled. Thank you, Lisa. On Friday, she called Libby. I'm refusing the settlement. We're going to court. Are you sure? I'm sure. All right. We prepare. The hearing was scheduled for Monday, 10 a.m. Joanna didn't sleep Sunday night. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, running through what she would say, how she would answer the judge's questions. Libby had told her to stay calm, answer clearly, don't get emotional. Joanna repeated it like a mantra, calm, to the point, no emotions. In the morning she got up at 6 and dressed in a strict outfit, black trousers, a white blouse, a blazer. She tied her hair back in a ponytail, minimal makeup. Took the folder with documents and left the apartment. She went to court by bus, looking out the window and thinking, today everything will be decided. The courthouse was old and gray, with columns at the entrance. Joanna passed through the metal detector and went up to the 3rd floor. A long hallway lined with doors. She found the right one and went in. The courtroom was small, the judge's desk, 2 tables for the parties, a few rows of benches for spectators. Libby was already there, sitting at one of the tables, sorting through papers. She saw Joanna and nodded. Joanna sat down beside her. 5 minutes later, Christopher entered with his lawyer, a man in his 50s, in an expensive suit, a folder tucked under his arm. Christopher looked pale and worn down. He sat at the opposite table without looking at Joanna. Tracy came in after him, sat on the spectator's bench, and looked at Joanna coldly, without emotion. At exactly 10, the judge entered, a woman around 55, in a robe, carrying the case file. Everyone stood. The judge sat down and opened the folder. Please be seated. We are hearing the case of Craddock Christopher versus Craddock Joanna on the invalidation of a gift agreement. Plaintiff, your position. Christopher's lawyer stood and began to speak. His voice was confident and polished. He laid it out. Christopher and Joanna had been married for 4 years. During the marriage, an apartment was acquired and registered in Christopher's name. Christopher signed a gift agreement believing he was signing tax-related documents at his wife's request. He was unaware that he was signing a gift agreement. This constituted deception, and therefore the agreement should be declared invalid. The judge listened, took notes, then asked, Defendant, your position? Libby stood. Your Honor, the defendant does not deny that the plaintiff was not aware of the document's content at the moment of signing. However, the defendant acted to protect her legal rights. She produced a flash drive with the recording and a stack of payment receipts. The judge took them and handed them to the clerk. Christopher's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, the audio recording was made without the plaintiff's consent. This violates the confidentiality of communications. Libby replied calmly, the recording was made to protect the defendant's rights. The plaintiff was planning fraud, and the defendant documented evidence of that. This is lawful. The judge raised her hand. I will decide on the admissibility of the recording after listening to it. Clerk, please play the recording. The clerk inserted the flash drive and turned on the speakers. Christopher's voice filled the room. What can you do? I'll put up with this ugly woman for another year, until she finishes paying off the mortgage. Joanna sat with her hands clenched into fists, listening to Christopher talk to his mother, planning how to take half the apartment from her. The recording lasted 3 minutes. When it ended, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked at Christopher. Plaintiff, do you confirm that this is your voice? Christopher nodded without lifting his eyes. Yes. Did you indeed plan to divorce the defendant and demand a division of the apartment that she was paying for? Christopher was silent. His lawyer nudged him with an elbow. Christopher finally forced out, I was angry. We had a fight. I said too much. Libby stood again. Your Honor, in the recording the plaintiff clearly states, I registered the apartment using her money. This is an admission that the apartment was paid for by the defendant. I asked that the payment records be entered into evidence. The judge took the stack of receipts and began reviewing them, leafing through for a long time. Then she looked at Christopher. Plaintiff, did you make mortgage payments? I helped around the house, paid for groceries. Libby objected, Your Honor, the plaintiff earned $1,700 a month. The mortgage payment was $2,400. Mathematically, he could not both support the household and pay the mortgage. The judge nodded and continued reviewing the documents. Then she set them aside. Recess for deliberation. The decision will be announced in 30 minutes. Everyone stood. The judge left. Joanna remained seated, unable to move. Libby placed a hand on her shoulder. It's going well. I can see the judge is on your side. Joanna nodded, but inside everything was shaking. The 30 minutes felt endless. Christopher sat hunched over in his chair, head down. Tracy came up to him and whispered something. He didn't respond. After 30 minutes, the judge returned. Everyone stood. The judge sat down, opened the folder, adjusted her glasses. Joanna clenched her hands under the table so hard her nails dug into her palms. Her heart was pounding in her throat. Libby sat beside her, calm, pen hovering over her notepad. Please be seated, the judge said. Everyone sat. The silence was so deep you could hear a car passing outside. Having reviewed the case materials, heard the parties, and examined the evidence, the court reaches the following conclusions. The judge paused and turned a page. The plaintiff claims he signed the gift agreement while being misled. However, the court takes into account the audio recording of the plaintiff's conversation with a third party, in which the plaintiff directly states his intention to divorce the defendant after the mortgage is paid off and to demand half of the apartment paid for with the defendant's funds. This statement indicates the plaintiff's intent to obtain unjust enrichment at the defendant's expense. Joanna closed her eyes. Breathing became easier. Additionally, the court takes into account the payment documents submitted by the defendant, which show that all mortgage payments totaling $133,000 were made by the defendant. The plaintiff has not provided evidence that he made any payments or participated in repaying the loan. The judge raised her head and looked at Christopher. The court denies the claims of Craddock Christopher. The gift agreement transferring the apartment from Craddock Christopher to Craddock Joanna is deemed valid. Court costs are to be borne by the plaintiff. The decision may be appealed within 1 month. Joanna felt her shoulders finally drop. It was over. The judge closed the folder and stood up. Everyone stood with her. She left the courtroom. Joanna stood there, unable to move. Libby turned to her and held out her hand. Congratulations. You won. Joanna shook her hand. Her fingers were cold, even though the room felt stuffy. Thank you. The decision takes effect in a month if there's no appeal. But I don't think they'll appeal. There are no grounds. Joanna nodded. She turned to leave and met Christopher's eyes. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not with anger. Not with hatred. With confusion. Joanna held his gaze for a few seconds, then looked away and walked out. The hallway was loud. People crowded near other courtroom doors, talking. Someone was smoking by a window despite the ban. Joanna walked quickly toward the exit. Libby stayed beside her. Joanna, stop for a second. You'll need to get a copy of the ruling in a week. Go to the court clerk's office. Okay. And the remaining fee $2,000. You can transfer it to my card, I sent the details. I'll transfer it today. Libby nodded and offered her hand in goodbye. Good luck. You did great. You didn't give up. Thank you for everything. Joanna stepped outside. It was a clear March day. The sun was bright, the snow had started to soften, water dripped from rooftops. She stopped on the courthouse steps, pulled out her phone, and checked the time. 11 a.m. 2 hours earlier she had walked in with a heavy heart, not knowing how it would end. Now she was walking out with a decision in her favor. She called Lisa. Lisa, I won. Seriously? Joanna, I'm so happy. Congratulations. Thanks. The court denied Christopher. The apartment is mine. No way. I knew you could do it. How are you? Are you happy? Joanna thought. I don't know. I feel like I should be, but I can't. Lisa was quiet. Joanna, that's normal. You lived with him for 4 years. Even if he's a jerk, it still hurts. Yeah. It hurts. Give yourself time. It'll ease up. And right now the main thing is you didn't lose the apartment. You defended what's yours. That's a win. Yeah, a win. They said goodbye. Joanna put her phone away, walked down the steps, and headed to the bus stop. On the bus ride home, she stared out the window. The city was living its normal life, people walking, cars driving, somewhere a new building was going up, a crane lifting slabs into place. Spring was coming. Soon all the snow would melt, the first buds would appear on the trees, birds would start singing. A new life. At home she took off her coat, went into the kitchen, put the kettle on, sat at the table, took out the green folder, opened it, and flipped through the mortgage receipts. 320 of them. For years of her life, each one for $2,400. $133,000. All hers. Now officially, by court decision. She closed the folder and put it back on the shelf, poured tea, took the mug, the same white one with the chipped rim. She sat by the window, like she had so many times before. Sipped slowly, watching the courtyard. Down below, kids were throwing snowballs and laughing. An old woman was walking a little mixed-breed dog on a leash. Life kept moving. That evening Joanna cooked dinner. Simple, just for herself. Buckwheat with chicken. She ate slowly at the kitchen table where a month earlier she had set that festive dinner for Christopher. Candles, meat, wine. It was all in the past now. Now she ate alone. And it felt strange. Not good, not bad, just strange. After dinner she washed the dishes, dried her hands, and went into the living room. Turned on the TV, but didn't watch. Turned it off. She sat on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest. Thinking about what came next. The apartment was hers. Divorce was inevitable. Christopher would file, for sure. Fine. She wouldn't fight it. For years of marriage were over, and it was for the best. And after that? Work. Life. Maybe she would take a vacation and go somewhere. Seattle, like she had dreamed. Alone. Look at the ocean, the bridges, the museums. Just be with herself. Joanna got up and went to the window. Outside it was dark, streetlights glowing. The city was lit up, and it was beautiful. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and remembered Tracy's words, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Maybe she was right. Joanna had deceived Christopher into signing the gift. It wasn't fair. But what he had done wasn't fair either. Where was the truth? Maybe there was no truth at all. Only what happened. She defended what was hers, and he lost. Was it fair? She didn't know. But she couldn't have done it any other way. The next day she went to work. Co-workers congratulated her. Lisa must have told Allison, and Allison told everyone else. Joanna accepted the congratulations quietly, thanked them. At lunch, Allison sat down with her in the cafeteria. Joanna, I heard you won the case. Good for you, you didn't give up. Thanks. And how are you now? Is it hard? Joanna thought. It's hard, but not the way I expected. I get it. My sister got divorced too. There was a court case. She said the scariest part is when it's over. Like you win, but there's no joy. Yeah. Exactly. Allison put a hand on her shoulder. It'll pass. You'll see. Give yourself time. Joanna nodded. Maybe it would. With time. A week later she went to court to pick up a copy of the decision. The clerk's office was on the first floor. A woman in glasses sat behind the window. Joanna gave her last name and the case number. The woman searched through papers and pulled out a folder. Here. Sign here. Joanna signed and received an envelope stamped by the court. She went outside, opened it. The court decision. 5 pages, a stamp, the judge's signature. At the bottom, this decision enters into legal force 1 month after it is issued in final form, if no appeal is filed. A month. 1 more month to wait. Though an appeal was unlikely, Libby said there were no grounds. Joanna put the decision back into the envelope, slipped it into her bag, and walked home on foot, even though it was about 3 kilometers. She wanted to walk, to think. She walked through downtown past old buildings, stores, cafes. Spring was gaining strength. The snow had almost melted, and last year's grass was showing through in patches. The air smelled like meltwater and something fresh. Joanna breathed it in and thought that soon everything would change. Not only her life, but something inside her too. For 4 years she had been Christopher's wife, living his life, adjusting to him. Now she was alone again. Free. And that was frightening and exciting at the same time. Near her building she stopped and looked up at the windows of her apartment on the 5th floor. The light was on. She had left it that morning. A light in the window of her apartment. Hers. Not theirs. Not shared. Hers. She went up to the 5th floor, unlocked the door, took off her coat, and went into the kitchen. The kettle was already on the stove. She turned on the gas, took the white chipped mug from the cupboard, and set it on the table. The kettle boiled. She poured water, dropped in a tea bag, sat down, and wrapped her hands around the mug to warm them. That same mug she had drunk coffee from on that Saturday morning when she overheard Christopher's conversation with Tracy. Back then she hadn't finished it. Her hands were shaking too much. The mug sat there all day afterward, a reminder of the moment everything collapsed. Joanna wanted to throw it away, but she didn't. She kept it. And now she was drinking tea from it, and it felt like a symbol. What seems broken can still be used. With a crack, with a chipped rim, but it still works. When she finished her tea, she washed the mug, dried it, put it back in the cupboard. Then she went into the living room and lay down on the couch. Closed her eyes. Exhaustion hit all at once, as if the month of tension finally released and her body went limp. She lay there, listening to the silence. Music played softly from the neighbor's apartment, quiet and melodic. Somewhere below, the building's front door slammed. Normal sounds of a normal evening. Joanna felt herself starting to fall asleep. She didn't fight it. She fell asleep right there, still dressed, covered with a blanket. She woke up in the middle of the night because of the silence. The clock said 2. She got up, went into the bedroom, undressed, and lay down. The bed was cold and empty. Before, Christopher had been beside her, and she had gotten used to his presence. Now he was gone. She lay in the middle of the bed with her arms spread out, and it felt strange. So much space. Too much. But she would get used to it. People get used to everything. A month passed without her even noticing. Work, home. Work, home. Joanna moved along on autopilot, not letting herself think too much. Christopher didn't reach out. He didn't file an appeal. Libby called and told her the decision had taken legal effect. The apartment now officially and permanently belonged to Joanna. She could finally put a period at the end of it. Joanna thanked her, said goodbye, and hung up. She sat at the kitchen table, took out the green folder, opened it, and flipped through everything: payment slips, statements, the court decision. Everything was there. The story was over. She closed the folder, stood up, went into the room, opened the closet, and pulled down a box from the top shelf, things she had been meaning to sort through for ages. She put the folder inside, closed the box, and placed it back on the shelf. That was it. The past on a shelf. Life goes on. A week later, an official notice arrived from Christopher through his lawyer. He was filing for divorce and asking for the marriage to be dissolved without any division of property, since the property dispute had already been resolved by the court. Joanna read it, signed her consent, and sent it back. The divorce would be finalized in a month, one-sided, without her presence. One more month, and she would be free, not just in reality, but legally too. April arrived with real spring. Trees turned green, birds sang in the mornings, and the sun finally felt warm. Joanna took a week of vacation. She decided to go to Seattle, like she had always wanted. She bought plane tickets and booked a hotel. She went alone, and that felt right. She needed to be with herself, to think, to let go of everything that had been. In Seattle, she walked along the waterfront, looked out at the ocean, went to museums. The city was beautiful and open, and Joanna felt small against the skyscrapers, the piers, the water. But it was a good feeling. She was part of something bigger, and her personal drama didn't seem so huge anymore. People lived, loved, lost, and found again. It had always been that way, and it would continue. On the last evening, she sat on the waterfront, watching the ocean. The water was dark and cold, rolling in waves calm and unstoppable. Joanna thought her life was like that water now. Moving forward no matter what. There had been rapids, there had been quiet backwaters where everything spun in circles, but the river still flows toward the sea. When she came home, Joanna felt the apartment had truly become hers. Not legally, that had happened already, but inside. She walked through the rooms, touched the walls and the furniture, and didn't think of Christopher. He had vanished from this space the way he had vanished from her life. Only memories remained, but they no longer burned. One evening at the end of April, she sat in the kitchen with tea. Outside, dust thickened and the city lit up. Joanna remembered how 4 years ago she and Christopher had moved into this apartment. Back then she thought it was the beginning of their life together, that they would be happy here. It didn't work out. But something else did. She learned how to stand up for herself. She understood she could be strong, that she didn't have to endure, bend, and sacrifice herself for the illusion of a family. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Joanna opened it. "This is Christopher. The divorce is finalized. You will receive the certificate by mail. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Everything I did was low. You didn't deserve that. I hope you'll be happy." Joanna read the message several times, then set her phone down on the table. She didn't reply. What was the point? The past couldn't be undone, and words wouldn't change what had happened. Christopher apologized, maybe sincerely, maybe not. It didn't matter. She didn't hate him. She had simply let go. A week later, the divorce certificate arrived. Joanna opened the envelope and pulled out the paper, official seal, signature, date. The marriage was dissolved. She was free. She folded the certificate and put it in a desk drawer, then took out her passport and opened the page with the marriage stamp. Now it would be stamped with divorce when she went to the right office. Or maybe she wouldn't bother, who cared? The main thing was that legally she was Joanna Craddock again. Not someone's wife. Just Joanna. That evening she called Lisa. "Lisa, the divorce is finalized. How are you?" "Fine. Actually. Good. I'm happy for you, Joanna. You did great. Not everyone could handle what you went through. Thanks for being there. You helped me so much. Oh, please. That's what friends are for. Listen, let's meet this weekend. Let's go somewhere and celebrate your freedom." Joanna smiled. "Let's do it." On Saturday they met at a cafe downtown, sat by the window, drank coffee, talked about life. Lisa talked about her kids, her job, her summer plans. Joanna listened and chimed in now and then. She felt calm, light. She hadn't felt that light in a long time. "So what are you planning?" Lisa asked. "For summer, I mean." Joanna thought. "I don't know. Maybe I'll travel somewhere else. Or maybe I'll just stay home and rest." "And what about dating?" "Dating? Well, are you going to see anyone?" Joanna laughed. "Lisa, I just got divorced. It's too soon." "Why too soon? You're young, you're beautiful. Life goes on." "It does. But for now I want to be alone, you know? Truly alone. No man next to me, no obligations, no need to bend myself into someone else's shape." Lisa nodded. "I get it. That's the right call. Give yourself time." They stayed at the cafe until evening, then went their separate ways. Joanna walked home slowly. The city was beautiful in the evening, quiet. She watched people, cars, shop windows. All of it was part of her life. Her new life. At home she changed, took a shower, put on comfortable clothes, went to the kitchen, made tea, and sat by the window, her favorite spot. She took the white cup with the chipped rim, poured tea, and drank slowly while looking out. It was dark outside, streetlights glowing. Somewhere below, kids were laughing on the playground. Joanna thought about how 4 years of her life were gone. 4 years of work, mortgage payments, illusions. They weren't wasted. She got the apartment, a roof over her head. But most importantly, she got a lesson. She would never blindly trust again. She would never sacrifice herself for someone who didn't value it. She learned how to be strong. And that was priceless. She finished her tea, stood up, washed the cup, put it back on the shelf, and looked at it. Old, chipped but still doing its job. Like her, worn down by life, but not broken. Joanna turned off the kitchen light, went into the living room, and lay down on the couch. She took a book from the shelf, one she'd been wanting to read for a long time but never had time for. She opened it and started reading. Words formed sentences, sentences became paragraphs, and she sank into someone else's story, forgetting her own for a while. Outside, the city kept living. Cars drove by, people walked, somewhere someone laughed, somewhere someone cried, somewhere someone loved, somewhere someone said goodbye. Life moved on, and Joanna Craddock was part of it. Just part of it. Not a heroine, not a victim, just a woman who had been tested and stayed standing. She closed the book, set it on the table, and shut her eyes. The tiredness was calm, almost pleasant. Tomorrow there would be another day, work, errands, responsibilities. But it would be her day, her life, her apartment, her freedom. And that was enough.